Good morning and welcome to those joining the webinar this morning. My name is Andy Bradley from Delta-E. Welcome to everyone. I hope the weather wherever you are is as good as it is in Edinburgh today. Beautiful blue sky and, well, probably 16, 17 degrees, and I'm sure in many places it's much hotter than that than Edinburgh. But it's a very pleasant day, so I hope the weather's pleasant where you are. I can see many people joining the webinar, so we'll just let people sort of log in and in the next minute or so before we kick off. While we're doing that, just to explain a little bit about the software, if you're not familiar with it, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen a dialog box, and there's a section in there called questions, and you can submit your questions during the presentation. I'll be chairing today. My colleagues will do most of the talking, but I'll be keeping an eye on the question panel. So we'll try and pick up as many questions as we can as we go through, or certainly at the end. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to address some of those. So feel free to put in your questions or comments, observations as we go through, and we'll try and pick up those as we go through. So use the questions box on the right-hand side of the screen. The webinar today, we're certainly finished within the hour, so we're finished sort of by 11 o'clock UK time or midday in Europe. Hopefully just a few minutes before that, so people have 2 or 3 minutes practice to stretch their legs before the next appointment or call. We're trying to run the webinar for about 55 minutes or so. I can see people still joining, but perhaps we'll just start with some introductions with my colleagues. So if I move to the next slide, allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. So perhaps John, start with my fellow director, John Slow.
Yep, hi everyone. John Slow, sitting next to Andy here in Edinburgh. You can probably tell from our accents that neither of us are actually Scottish, but both of us live in Scotland. I'll be talking today from from a few perspectives as we go.
Thanks, John. Chris, would you like to go next?
Morning, everyone. I'm Chris Matson from LCP, so based in London. Specialise in the kind of long-term modelling of the electricity markets, and we'll be talking through a bit of some of those challenges and opportunities on this webinar.
Cool, thank you, Chris. And Dave?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. Dave Openshaw. I'm sitting in a very sunny East Anglia at the moment. I'm now an independent consultant, Millhouse Power Limited, but I've been an associate with Delta-E for some years now. My specialism is really electricity transmission and distribution.
Cool, thank you, Dave. So in terms of the agenda today, we'll just do some introductions regarding LCP and Delta-E for those that don't know us, and obviously just to summarise our recent merger of the organisations. But the main part of the presentation will be around the opportunities and challenges we see around the energy system transition, and we really want to sort of bring that to life by sharing with you some of the projects that we've been working on over recent times. So just to kick off briefly, for LCP, Chris, would you like to take the slide and just to explain to the audience a little bit more about LCP?
Yeah, sure. LCP is a financial consultancy based in London. I guess traditionally operated mainly in the kind of actuarial space, so in sort of pensions, investment, and insurance, providing detailed analysis and using sort of statistical techniques to do long-term modelling and provide the financial services sector with essentially forecasts of those sectors, using increasingly with a focus on using technology. Now we've sort of applied some of those skills to other areas, and we started our energy analytics practice about 10 years ago now. And I guess we're traditionally best known in the UK energy market for providing the model that the UK government uses. So the model that BEIS use for all of their long-term electricity market analysis and projections, and the kind of analysis that underpins the net zero strategy in the power sector in the UK is using our model. And we're increasingly now using that model to go out to industry and provide clients with forecasts and analysis to help them understand how the energy transition is going to affect them. I lead up on the long-term forecasting side of our work. We also have a very short-term model as well. So we have data platform called LCP Enact, which provides forecasts and visualization analysis used by traders and optimizers and analysts are looking over the next couple of hours, whereas I guess I'm looking over the next couple of decades. That Enact product is launching into Europe and will, features data from over 30 different countries. Yeah, and I guess we'll talk a little bit about the motivations for the LCP Delta merger in a second, but I think first just a bit of an introduction from the Delta side.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah, and for those that are in Essen next week at eWorld, LCP and Delta-E have a stand there, and we'll be talking a bit more about the Enact software, which is becoming available for different European countries over the next weeks. Regarding Delta-E, I think most of the audience will know us, so just briefly, we're very much a downstream focused research consulting business. The energy transition is everything we do, and you see on the right hand side of that slide that sort of broad range of technologies and topics that we cover within our business. We've been doing this research. John is one of the founder directors of Delta-E from 15 years ago, and we've been in this space for a very long time, and we're recently very excited to have combined our business with LCP's, and just to spend a minute or so on this. Why have we done that? And really, what we see in the energy transition is the need to align customers, retail, networks, energy markets, and generation. We see, the central to the energy transition is really the alignment between the different parts of the supply chain, and our combined skills and expertise, LCP more on the upstream, Delta-E more on the downstream, really give us that unique set of capabilities, we believe, to support our clients in new and innovative ways. So there's a really strong industrial logic to our combination, and certainly from Delta's perspective on the downstream, having access to LCP's big data, AI, sort of system modeling capabilities is really exciting for us to start to do much more quantitative analysis about the values that the downstream can bring to this transition. Chris, do you have any perspective from your upstream?
Yeah, and from the upstream perspective, I guess increasingly we can't model that upstream space in isolation. We can't just be looking at that in isolation. We need that kind of whole system thinking. More and more the kind of demand side is going to play a key role in the transition, both in terms of providing flexibility and also just being active in that market. So, in order for us to offer our clients that kind of same sort of full view of what the energy transition looks like, we really want to cover that full value chain, and really excited about the opportunities that the combined teams provides.
Cool, great, thank you, Chris. So, setting the scene for today's webinar, we'll first of all just quite quickly just recap some of the drivers as to why whole system thinking is so important. What do we see as the key opportunities and challenges arising from that, and then we really want to bring it to life by talking about some of the projects that both organisations have been working on over the last months. So, in terms of the drivers, a very simple diagram, the traditional sort of unbundled industry that I'm sure everyone in the audience is very familiar with, the different steps from generation to customer, and really that's being disrupted across the supply chain, really. So, generation is being disrupted as weather-dependent generation comes onto the system in increasing quantities. Wholesale markets are being disrupted as value starts to shift, perhaps from day-ahead markets more into intraday markets. New markets are emerging. Networks are being disrupted as distributed generation starts to be connected, and flows in both directions across the networks become increasingly challenging to manage. The retail business is being disrupted by trends like electrification, consumers generating their own electricity and optimizing that, so changing the power flows around the distribution system. And of course customers are being disrupted. More recently we've had bill shock, energy price crisis, but trends around electrification, digitalization in the home means that there are opportunities now for customers to do things that weren't possible even 5 years ago. So there's disruption all the way through the value chain, which is leading to some huge questions around loss of synergies and potential conflicts as these challenges in each part of the value chain are addressed. So big question around how we maximize this whole system benefit and crucially minimize the cost for consumers. So we believe that's going to lead to new types of value chain emerging, and on the next slide we just try and set out how we see that developing. So John, perhaps would like to talk to this?
Yeah, so this slide's a lot more complicated than the last one, but I think the energy system is becoming much more complex. The two big changes are on the left on the centralized assets. So those centralized assets are becoming less about thermal power generation and much more about renewables, in many cases weather dependent renewables. And on the right hand side, customers, the blue box and distributed assets. So very large numbers of distributed assets. They might be heat pumps, they might be smart electric vehicle chargers, might be batteries, it might be flexibility from industrial customers. Some of it behind the meter, some of it in front of the meter. So two very big changes are to the renewables, large renewables, the centralized assets, and the distributed assets. And rather than a linear value chain, you have a much more complex interdependent system. So the arrows flowing between these boxes are not all, but many of the interactions between different parts of the system. You can see a lot of arrows flowing from the distributed assets back to the orange boxes in the middle. So these are energy system services that a battery, a heat pump, an electric vehicle charger might supply to the energy system. You can see interdependencies between energy networks and system operation. So there are new value chains all over the place in terms of the energy system. And what we can forget when we get, when we have a lot of engineers, economists, energy system geeks, we can forget a bit about the box on the right-hand side and customers. And the whole point of the energy system is to provide outcomes to customers, to keep customers comfortable, to provide the processes that they need. So the rise of distributed assets means that we're moving from a market that was really based on selling commodity to customers to a market that blends commodity and products to provide services to customers. So you can see the smart tariffs and services arrow here. And there are huge opportunities, both in providing these services to customers, in financing them, in new propositions, new business models, and in these distributed assets providing services back to the energy system. Lots of other complexities. I'm just going to pull out three very quickly. One is to build on what Chris said, energy markets are becoming much more about the very short term, balancing the system in the intraday markets, and the very long term. So often government influence schemes like capacity markets for the very long term. Energy networks challenges both to transmission and connecting all of these large centralized assets and to distribution, because these distributed assets are appearing on the distribution network. So a lot of challenges to how the energy networks are operated and managed. And then finally, the system operation traditionally has taken place at the national level. That will of course carry on, but more and more these distributed assets need to be optimized at a local level as well, either formally or informally. And lastly, energy vectors on the left here, you can see this isn't just about electricity, it's about interplays between all of these different energy vectors. Electrification being the dominant theme, but lots of other flows between these energy vectors.
Thanks, John. It's a complex, challenging journey we're on, and so I'd like to now perhaps move on to the next section just to highlight some of the opportunities and challenges that we've identified at Delta-E and LCP regarding this transition journey that we're on towards the new value chains that John's just set out. So we've got four key areas that we'd like to talk through briefly now. First one being around new functions. Dave, would you like to take this slide and talk around this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for all the reasons that John has mentioned, I mean, this is a UK initiative, but I think is very relevant to all countries, actually, particularly across Europe. So it was quickly becoming apparent, including to the UK government, that these new value chains were going to have major implications for the way the future power system would need to be managed. New assets, new services, new risks, most importantly, new demands from customers, were all shaping a very different set of opportunities and challenges for the sector. And that in turn meant that a business as usual approach wouldn't deliver a power system that met the desires of stakeholders and customers or the ambitions of government. And so with the UK government's approval, it's the Department of Energy and Climate Change as it was in those days, the Institution of Engineering and Technology and the UK Energy Systems Catapult jointly embarked on a programme of work which we call the Future Power System Architecture Programme. And the purpose of that was to identify the new functionality that will be required. And when we talk about functionality, we're talking about not just technical functionality, we're talking about market functionality as well. So the programme identified 35 new or significantly enhanced functions that would need to be embedded in the system, in the management of the power system by 2030. And as I said, these functions were grouped under a number of headings, particularly investment planning, operational planning, real-time and balancing, and markets and settlement. So importantly, the programme considered both a system and a future customer and stakeholder perspective. And Delta-EE made a very important contribution in this area in identifying insights into the requirements of all existing and new parties and also future stakeholders' needs. And that culminated in 2 reports that you can see illustrated in this slide. I have to say there's a lot of reports generated by this programme which are available from the Catapult website. But to conclude, there were 2 really important conclusions that came from the programme. Were firstly the need for a more transparent, inclusive and agile form of energy system governance, commensurate with the scale and pace of energy transition. You know, the existing governance arrangements were just too slow, too bureaucratic to be able to keep up. And secondly, the need for an independent authority with responsibility for strategic whole system energy planning. And so we're pleased that the UK government and the GB energy regulator Ofgem have recently consulted on a proposal to establish a future system operator that will perform that important role. We refer to it as an energy systems architect in our programme of work, but importantly, it's somebody that will have a strategic planning role and coordinate the development of the power system and indeed the wider energy system as we move to 2030 and beyond to achieve our net zero goals by 2050.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So there's big challenges around sort of defining new functions, new institutional roles really within the architecture of the system. Thank you, Rosie, for your question. I'll come back to that at the end of this section, I think. Just moving on to the second area that we've identified around flexibility, and Dave, perhaps you could start on this one, and
yeah.
John.
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of functionality for any country looking to decarbonise its power system and its energy demand, flexibility will become increasingly important. But the full value chain for flexibility has many components. So, for example, aggregators and virtual power plant operators for residual system balancing, transmission system operators for operating reserve, including demand, downturn and upturn, capacity markets, which we've mentioned, e.g. batteries and demand side response, DSOs increasingly for distribution network constraint management to support networks under peak demand conditions and under planned outage conditions, and also to aid post-fault restoration in certain circumstances, wholesale day ahead and intraday markets, and right down at the domestic SME level, we're beginning to see the development of dynamic time of use tariffs, for example, day ahead energy tariffs, giving incentives for customers, both domestic and SME, to be flexible in the way they use their demand, or indeed the way they use their home generation. But looking at it from the perspective of an aggregator or virtual power plant operator, obviously the objective for them is to manage the dispatch of flexible assets to maximise value or revenue stacking, if you like, for their clients. However, whether or not that maximises value for the whole system and therefore for electricity consumers really depends on the market signals truly reflecting the whole system value at any given time. So lack of market coordination is going to lead to a loss of synergies and potential conflicts, and therefore there's a need for a unified approach to ensure flexibility is procured and dispatched for the maximum whole system benefit, which sort of leads to the right-hand side of this chart. John, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add in terms of the VPP value chain.
Yeah, I think there's different sources of flexibility. This value chain here applies to very distributed flexibility, often with assets on the customer side of the meter. And that it's easy to talk about flexibility. It's hard to develop flexibility. But I think we're seeing a lot of companies specializing either in all aspects of this value chain or certain parts of this value chain, or applying it to particular sectors such as smart charging of electric vehicles. And the bits, Dave, that you were talking about there, that optimization part, it's how you optimize the flexibility for all 6 of those bubbles, I guess, ultimately, in a coordinated way.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's a good moment to pick up a question from Rosie, actually, around sort of the regulatory framework enabling vulnerable customers, poorer customers, to benefit from flexibility or flexible energy systems. Dave, do you think that there is enough focus on that topic? You know, on the customer. John mentioned right at the beginning that often the customer isn't the centre of focus. Do you think when these discussions, these debates are being had in the industry, there is sufficient focus on enabling benefits for vulnerable customers?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There is always this danger of overlooking, you know, those who are vulnerable or fuel poor or whatever, or less able to engage, you know, even in terms of buying the technology, you know, to enable them to engage. Particularly as we're seeing this energy crisis at the moment, you know, across Europe, which isn't going to go away anytime soon, that we do make sure that vulnerable customers are, you know, protected in this way. I mean, there have been some projects. I'd cite one particular one, energy-wise, that UK Power Networks did several years ago, which really focused on, you know, fuel poor and vulnerable customers to make sure they could, you know, understand how to use their electricity or indeed gas in a more efficient and beneficial way to them. And I do think, although we've got issues with tariffs at the moment and price caps and so on, there are, you know, tariffs like Agile Octopus that, you know, will enable customers to benefit with the supplier taking control of their demand and optimizing that so that the customer achieves the benefit. But I think it is a good question, and it's easy to overlook these niche vulnerable customers when you're, you know, sort of marketing a new product and not recognizing that they may have difficulty engaging with it.
Yeah.
There's one example, I think a great example from the Irish market, inspired by supermarkets finding uses of food that's about to go out of date or food waste. There's a lot of curtailed wind power in Ireland, and there's an initiative called Energy Cloud, which is trying to equip homes, typically housing associations, so often vulnerable customers, with a smart thermostat in their hot water tank. And when wind energy would be curtailed, switching on that hot water tank to soak up that excess wind and providing those customers with free, so to speak, energy. So I think there's a huge amount that can be done for all customer types. It's not just about well-off customers with electric vehicles and heat pumps. I think the question as to whether the regulatory framework encourages it or not is a good question, but there's huge opportunities for all types of customers, I think.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, John. We'd better move on to the next area, which is more on markets. Chris, you were going to talk to this one.
Yeah, sure. So I think just looking, I guess, sort of kind of quantifying some of the scale of the sort of flexibility challenge, and using here the GB market as an example, but I guess the same principles apply in other markets. And we did some analysis here for National Grid, the system operator in the UK, and sort of, I guess, looking to kind of understand the kind of quantifying, you know, what that flexibility looks like going forward. Because I guess traditionally, your flexibility in the electricity market has been provided by very large scale centralized generation. So large coal plant or large gas plant, CCGTs, and they might, you know, be running 50, 60, 70, even 80% of the hours throughout the year. But as you move forward, and what the sort of charts here are showing, as you move forward, renewable generation, so in the UK, a lot of that will be offshore wind, but also significant amounts of solar and onshore wind as well, will provide the vast majority of your generation. However, there will still be hours when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and there is that requirement for significant levels of kind of flexible, reliable supply that can be turned on potentially for only a few hours. So that chart on the right there is showing that requirement. So if you take the sort of projected demand under a few of these different scenarios the National Grid had developed, what is the requirement for that flexible, firm capacity? And that's actually increasing. So you're going from sort of maybe 40 gigawatts now up to, in some scenarios, up to 80 gigawatts, so almost doubling. But you know, the amount of hours or how often that flexible capacity is required is decreasing. So the chart on the left there is showing, you know, the average load factor. So how often during the year these plants are running is decreasing steadily over time, and by the time you get to 2050 in a kind of net zero world, they might only be on average required 3% of the hours during the year. And I guess that changes the whole market here for how these are remunerated. You know, you're moving from a market where they can rely on capturing, you know, electricity prices, providing them electricity market or energy markets essentially providing the majority of their revenues, to a situation where you're increasingly reliant on capacity markets, because you're sort of paying for the capacity, the kind of, you know, the backup sort of capacity, which is only used a few times of the year. And it also points to different types of flexibility. So those sort of large scale gas plants, which are, you know, built to be running most of the time, are no longer appropriate. Because not only are they running less, they're running in unpredictable times as well. You can't say it's going to be the times I'm going to run is going to be 5 p.m. on a winter day. It's you don't know when it's going to be. It's going to be more to do with when the wind is low, for example, we don't know when that's going to be. So, you know, under a kind of current market system, this might be provided by you know, peaking generation. So you might use OCGTs or gas reciprocating engines to provide this flexibility. But do you really want to be building 50, 60, 70 gigawatts of backup OCGTs and paying them capacity payments? You really need to start thinking about where else in the market can we get this flexibility from? Can we provide a lot of this through demand side measures, through energy efficiency, through, you know, different types of storage? And I guess that's, you know, that's a big challenge for the market going forward.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. There's a question. I'll just pick up one question actually at the moment. Thanks everyone for the questions. But around market optimization, we've touched on a couple of times already. You know, how do we ensure that it delivers both efficiency and resilience to the energy system?
I mean, that's a big challenge, and that's, I guess, something that, I mean, in the UK anyway, the government is starting to look at what different market arrangements need to change to deal with all of these challenges. So, you know, you do need that security of supply. We don't want to move to a world where we've got blackouts happening at relatively regular intervals. So you do need that security of supply, but you don't want to be paying over the odds for it. So I guess getting that balance right is going to be a real challenge for policymakers and things going forward. That's not really answered the question. It's just sort of reiterated that it's a challenge. Yeah.
Be impressive if you could answer that in 20 seconds, Chris.
I was just going to say, since Chris has mentioned blackouts, we need to be conscious as well that restarting a system in the event of a system-wide blackout is going to become even more difficult going forward, you know, with the new energy mix that we have. And there are some important projects looking at how that might be done. But again, this is one of the new functions that's going to be required going forward, is how you restart a system in the event of a total or partial system blackout. And it's no mean challenge with the sort of energy mix we'll have going forward.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Dave. And we've just had a question about location, so that's a great segue to our next topic, actually. Dave.
Yeah, okay, that's predicting the next slide. Well done. So yeah, location, I guess you could say. It's important for a number of angles going forward. I mean, firstly, from a national perspective, I mean, one of the issues we have at the moment is that transmission, certainly in UK, and I'm sure it's true elsewhere as well, even on the interconnected system of Europe, transmission boundary constraint costs are rising, and balancing the network is therefore becoming more challenging, requiring increasing levels of inefficient redispatch, because the wholesale market basically isn't exposed to locational signals to inform trading decisions in operational timescales. In other words, you've got generation which is constrained by transmission boundary constraints, but that's not reflected in the wholesale price at the moment. And therefore, national pricing can sometimes send perverse incentives to flexible assets that actually worsen the constraints. So the idea would ideally be that you move to zonal or even better nodal pricing, which would then embed the cost of resolving transmission constraints within the wholesale energy prices. I mean, it's not happening yet, but I know that across Europe it's being seriously considered now. And I imagine that the review of energy market arrangements, which the UK government has announced as part of its British energy security strategy, will be seriously considering this possibility going forward. Now, taking from a regional perspective, however, this I think is a really important element in terms of how we make this transition, because holistic regional area energy planning can unlock place-specific opportunities that a centralised place-agnostic approach would overlook. So it's all very well having a central strategy, but if you then ignore the niche opportunities and challenges that individual regions will have, you're either going to spend a lot more money achieving your objective, or some of those opportunities are going to be missed altogether. So the important thing, therefore, though, is aggregation of those regional energy planning initiatives is important to be able to deliver the national energy objective more efficiently. And we see this as a really key role for the future system operator in Great Britain going forward, in providing that, if you like, iteration between the national objective and the regional opportunity, to making sure that at the end of the day we're maximising the regional opportunities to achieve the national objective, making best use of resources that are available, across the country, and they will differ hugely across the country. And then right down at the local level, there's opportunities, for community energy schemes, heat networks in particular locations, local energy markets, including peer-to-peer trading, and they can benefit customers in a given locality whilst delivering wider system benefits. So I think the key message is that there are these various disaggregation, if you like, of energy planning, and the important objective is to bring all those things together so it optimises, the energy transition from a national point of view, maximising those regional and indeed very local opportunities.
Thanks, Dave. John, do you have anything to add to the location point?
I think the bottom-up and top-down perspectives are interesting. They're often posed as either or, but I think it's an and, that the system does need to be optimized and managed at a national level, whichever country you're in. But increasingly we'll see optimization at a building level, self-consuming your photovoltaic electricity, so you're not exporting it to the grid. At a industrial park level, a microgrid where supply and demand is optimized at the industrial park. So I think we'll see that mix and blend of bottom up and top down, and hopefully the coordination that Dave described necessary to blend it all together.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Okay, so the final part of the presentation, I'd like to move on to talking through some examples, projects that we've been working on at Delta-E or LCP over recent months, and hopefully bring some of these issues to life a little bit. So I think we've got about 4 examples that we'll talk through. Thanks for the questions, everyone. Please keep them coming in, and we'll try and pick up some as we go through these, or at the end of the presentation. So the first case study is 4D heat, which, John, I think you were going to talk to.
Thanks, Andy. So building on the slide I talked to earlier, low carbon heating is there primarily to provide customer comfort, but can also provide energy system services. That low carbon heating with the appropriate controls can come in many different forms, as shown on the bottom there. And there are different ways to deliver that to customers, so that a heat pump doesn't necessarily have to be for someone that can afford it, the upfront cost, but could be delivered as a service. And this particular project, it's one of my favorite projects, carried out with some great partners for National Grid, ESO, and a distribution network operator, SSE, called 4D Heat. And the challenge was that in Scotland, there's a lot of curtailed wind, and that curtailment is often due to insufficient capacity at the Scotland-England border, which you can see between the orange and the blue. So rather than curtail the wind, could demand in Scotland be turned up or shifted, to better describe it, heat demand be shifted so that electric heating is shifted to when the wind would be curtailed. Can you do that, and can you do it without causing problems on the distribution network? So it's fine to avoid wind curtailment, but you could cause problems on the distribution network if all the electric heating suddenly comes on. How could you share that with customers? Coming back to one of the questions, is that via a tariff or a subsidy or a payment, or how do you share that benefit with customers? And what we've found through some very detailed modelling is that you could reduce curtailment payments by £24 million a year, reduce a huge amount of CO2 emissions, because if you're curtailing wind, then, well, if you make better use of the wind, then you avoid thermal plant. And through the controls, you could improve customer comfort and share some of that 24 million with the customers. So technically, very, very doable. From a market perspective, some market challenges at the moment in terms of the market structures, and quite a lot needed to do to put this into practice, some of which is evolving and being taken forward in the market. So exactly what does the proposition look like for a customer? Are they paying a fixed fee for their heat? Do they get cheaper electricity? Do they get an annual payment a year? How does the business model work? What's the role of the retailer? And how could you enhance these benefits through providing more flexibility, perhaps through a thermal store, use of hybrid heat pumps, or using an immersion heater in a hot water tank, even if it's gas that's powering the home? And not just heat, of course, but electric vehicles and electric storage, because going forward in 2030, electric heating, shifting electric heating could only avoid a small part of the wind curtailment in Scotland, actually. So we need as much flexibility as we can.
Well, John, what were the sort of outcomes from the customer from that project? You've got a nice relaxed man or woman in the bottom left-hand corner, improved customer comfort. Was there evidence from that study that customers saw the benefits of participating?
So this particular piece of work was more on technically can it be done rather than how would customers feel about it. But we have done a lot of market research across several European countries on how customers would react to improved controls. And like in any market, there are different customer groups. Some customers want to be in control all the time. Others actually are quite happy that if you deliver them a certain temperature, then they don't really care how that's happening. Some customers always want to buy their heating system and controls. Some are quite happy to have that delivered as a service. So I think their customers know what they have, but there's a lot of potential with controls to optimize the way homes are heated to provide better comfort and to capture some of this value that can be shared with the customers, so customers have a more comfortable home at a lower cost.
Yeah, okay, so it's outcome and bill that is really their primary motivations. Yeah. Okay, thanks John for summarising that. So on to the next case study we wanted to just briefly present on long duration storage. Chris, you were going to talk to this one.
Yeah, so this was, I guess we're increasingly seeing, investors and developers interested in the proposition of long duration storage. And I guess the charts on the left here kind of are just showing why long duration storage has a role to play. You're basically showing how often is demand really high and how often is demand very low versus how often is wind very low and wind very high. So in the top two charts there, you've got when demand is at its highest, it is only high for about 3 or 4 hours, and that's sort of over your evening peak from maybe 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Whereas when wind is very low, it will last for potentially 8, 12, 16, 20 hours. And going forward, the driver of your electricity prices is not going to be necessarily just demand being high, it's going to increasingly be wind being low. And the same works on the flip side. So looking at the bottom charts, when demand is at its lowest, it's sort of overnight period between 1 and 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning versus when wind is at its high. So going forward, with the drivers of low price events are also going to last for longer periods of time. So although short duration storage like batteries have a role to play, and we see the deployment of batteries being quite high in the UK market, this is Again, this is UK data, but obviously sort of the same principles apply to other markets. But increasingly we're thinking that there's going to be a big role here for longer duration storage to play. In GB currently there are some pump storage stations, and obviously pump storage is a proven mature technology. This project was looking at a more nascent technology, so for a company called eZinc that we're looking at zinc battery technology. So again, very long duration storage, so up to 50, even 100 hours of storage capacity. But then sort of trying to understand what would the benefits to the GB system be of that sort of technology. And the chart on the right there is showing what those benefits looked like. So if you were to deploy 1 gigawatt of this very long duration storage into the GB market, and those benefits add up to a kind of net present value of about £2.8 billion. So that kind of, I mean, in this particular project, that £2.8 billion kind of defines that's where we need to get our capex values down to in order to be able to provide a benefit to the GB system. And I guess this was being used to kind of demonstrate to the UK government, you know, this technology has a lot of merits, and if some early kind of funding to get this technology to commercial sort of scale could provide the system with some real benefits.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm not familiar with the technology. How far from being commercially deployable is it?
I think it's kind of probably a late this decade sort of time scale. They've got sort of demonstration plants already operating, or very sort of small scale demonstration operating. But yeah, it's a really interesting technology, and I guess there's the same principles apply across a range of potential long duration storage technology, whether it's sort of compressed air and flow batteries and all of those sorts of things. It's just being able to deploy them at that large scale.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks, Chris. Let's move on to the next topic, next project, hydrogen. John, I think you were going to talk to us as well.
Yeah, thanks. So actually the question just flows nicely into it. The question was, what about seasonal storage to avoid oversizing the network for peak demand? And we've just completed some work for, again, UK work, but same principles everywhere, of how hydrogen could be an asset for the electricity system. So the main purpose of hydrogen is to decarbonize hard to decarbonize sectors, such as some parts of industry or use of hydrogen in refineries. But hydrogen, just like the heating example, can also provide a lot of services to the energy system. And what we looked at was 11 different value chains for how hydrogen can provide services to the electricity system. One of them would be, you can see in point 5, reducing curtailment of wind. So you could use electrolysis to generate hydrogen. You could then store that hydrogen in underground salt caverns. This is being demonstrated in a really nice project called the Hipster project in France. And then that hydrogen could be used for peaking power, as in point value chain 2. So we've talked a lot about electricity. This, I think, is a nice example of the multi-vector challenge and opportunities in the energy system and some of the roles that hydrogen could play. I won't go into much more now, Andy, but
I mean, the report is available, or summary of the report is available on our website.
Yes. If you just Google that title, you'll find the link to the report summary.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with the study, please feel free to download the report summary or the report from our website. Thanks, John. And then moving on to, I think, our last case study, which was around Bittrade case study. So
so a innovation project that's led by one of the distribution network operators in GB, Electricity Northwest. Again, a number of partners, and I think that reflects the fact that these challenges or opportunities, to use glass half full word, need so many different skills that there's often lots of organizations involved in trying to tackle and solve the challenges or realize the opportunities. So this is about bringing together the location and flexibility themes we talked about earlier. And the distributed assets that I talked about at the beginning, typically being located on the distribution network. The distribution network is going to see a lot of pressure, and is seeing pressure already in some parts of Europe. This shows lots of generation connected to the distribution network, and at times that generation will produce more power than the distribution network can take. So some of that generation has to be curtailed or switched off, and the generator may accept a flexible connection because it's cheaper and quicker to connect to the network rather than waiting and paying for a bigger network to be built. But the challenge is that some of those generators will be curtailed in a certain order when the network becomes full. And what a number of distribution network companies across Europe are doing are starting to use flexibility, so paying customers to turn up or turn down demand to balance the network. But that's quite a commitment. If you're a customer, to enter into a contract that says, I will always turn down my demand or turn off my generation or turn up my demand at these times, is quite a commitment to take. There's quite a lot of risk in that. So the idea of this project is a trading platform so that you get secondary trades, and the distribution network operator can always make sure that their network capacity isn't exceeded, but flexibility in how that happens through these secondary trades between generators or even between demand customers. So you then have this neutral marketplace to allow this trading, and ideally this trading happens in coordination with a national system operator, so that one of these generators can provide flexibility services both at the distribution level and at the national level. So I picked this because I think it's a really nice example of both the location theme, the flexibility theme, and the rise in distributed assets that we talked about earlier.
Okay. David, do you have any comment on that? I know you're familiar with the project as well, aren't you?
Yes, well, I'm familiar with the challenge from my days as a distribution network operator too. Yeah, I mean, it is a very innovative approach. I mean, as you said at the beginning, the generators will often accept a curtail connection because it gets them on the system quicker, so they can start earning revenues more quickly. And you know, if you're talking about solar PV farms or onshore wind farms, you're talking of capacity factors of around 11, maybe 27% for wind. So the curtailment risk may not be that great initially, but as you get more and more DG connecting onto the networks, obviously that curtailment risk starts to rise. I mean, one thing to bear in mind, certainly in the UK, that the access charging arrangements are under review by the regulator Ofgem, and in summary, the proposal is that generators in future will pay a shallower connection charge than they are doing at the moment. So they'll still have to contribute to any reinforcement at the voltage of connection, but not upstream of that. So that does dilute to some extent the attraction of a curtail contract, but nevertheless, it can still get them onto the system more quickly. And indeed, if they can enter into this market, they can benefit by, you know, trading their liability, their curtailment liability, which makes it, for some of them, a more attractive proposition. So I think it's you know, it's a really good initiative, and you know, something that I'm sure we'll see replicated across Britain and indeed wider.
Okay, thanks David. So let's just summarize perhaps the key points, and then we can pick up some of the questions that we haven't addressed already. So just some key points. John, would you like to summarize?
Yeah, so where, how and when is maybe or where, sorry, where, how and when, how and where. Didn't rehearse that. Is maybe a bit simplistic, but it's trying to bring out, I think, in a simple way, the big challenges that we've talked about. And the key thing that I think is really, really hard is joining together those different parts of the value chain. My worry is the speed at which we as an industry in all different forms are addressing and can overcome these challenges. 2030 and our carbon reduction targets for 2030 are not that long away. The energy system has rightly been operated in quite a conservative way. You don't want to take risks with it. It's an incredibly complex system, but addressing these challenges, we won't hit our climate targets unless we address these challenges of when, how, and where.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, John. I think it's a really, it's a simplistic summary, but I think it brings out the key points, I think. And then you see on the right hand side of the slide that some of the ways that we're looking to support our customers through this journey, through this complex transition. Just kind of look at some of the questions. I think on the I think there's sort of one point I think I'd like to pick up, perhaps Dave and Chris, interested particularly in your views around, we've talked a lot about the GB or UK work we've been doing. How relevant are the learnings for that for other countries in Europe or even further afield, and how transferable are these case studies, the projects that we've been talking about to other countries, or indeed to what degree should the UK be looking outside of the UK and learning from other countries? Do either of you have a view on that? Dave, start with you perhaps.
Well, yes, the answer is we should be looking outside, and indeed we do. And I think, yes, they are very relevant to other countries, certainly across Europe. I think it's probably fair to say that Britain and arguably Ireland as well has some unique challenges because of the relatively small synchronous island that we operate under. So, frequency management is a bigger challenge in Great Britain, and therefore some of the challenges we've talked about are more urgent to resolve. But nevertheless, they will continue to apply across other networks as well. Even the European interconnected systems, will need to embrace some of these opportunities as well. I mean, Chris, I'm sure we'll have some views on that. But all I was saying in summary is I think probably GB is at the forefront because it's got the most urgent challenges, but nevertheless, they will apply to other countries as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. Yeah, I think the UK has been a bit of a market leader in some areas, such as sort of balancing, having a kind of a liquid sort of balancing market. But some of the reasons for that is because the challenges are emerging in the UK sooner, just because it's an island, and an island that doesn't rely on a lot of hydro, so you don't have that kind of inbuilt flexibility, and can also rely on the sort of smoothing of these sort of issues across the multiple connected markets. But those challenges will emerge in other markets as that sort of renewable penetration starts to come through. So I think a lot of as David was saying, a lot of the things that the UK is experiencing now will start to become bigger and bigger challenges in other markets as well.
Okay, thanks, Chris. John, there's a question about the VPP operator business, about the maturity of that. Do you have a perspective on that?
It's a really interesting question. When we first started looking at demand side flexibility about 4 or 5 years ago, was a time when aggregator businesses were emerging. So aggregators working with industrial and commercial customers, typically often backup generators, effectively networking all those assets and selling that flexibility often to the system operator. And there weren't many price signals available in the market, or there weren't many value streams that were accessible. But the number of aggregators that popped up across Europe was astonishing. We were tracking, I think, 70 companies when the market was embryonic. And I think that's absolutely fantastic because it shows the entrepreneurial passion, energy, ideas that are there, that you expose one new price signal and you've got this wave of innovation. Now that 70 is consolidated and it's started to specialize more. Overall, I would say it's still maturing, but you've now got platforms within platforms. So you might have one aggregator that specializes in smart charging of electric vehicles. There are a number of those type of aggregators in many countries, and they might offer that flexibility into a super aggregator or another platform sitting above them that accesses all different sources of flexibility. So I wouldn't call it mature, I'd probably call it maturing. Different paces in different markets. In Germany, the drivers have been very different from the UK, for example. But what we're now seeing is more pan-European companies, more companies building scale. And that scale, I think, will be critical because the cost of platforms can then be spread over many, many customers. And it become even more cost-effective way of providing their system services.
Okay. But it's become a real commercial business today.
It is a real business.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Chris, there's a question for you, just specifically on LCP modelling, regarding are you adapting modelling to nodal pricing in case Ofgem decides to go that way?
I think it's Bayes that ultimately decides, but yeah, I think I think in short, yes, I think we'll probably not to the full nodal level for. I don't think that there's a lot of value in trying to model nodal prices in 2046, but I think regional kind of disparities are probably going to remain. Even, you know, that's probably the optimal result, is that regional disparities remain. It's probably not worth reinforcing the network to a point where you have no constraints on it. So that sort of zonal modelling is something we kind of already do, but I think we're sort of looking to make that more granular to sort of, I guess, capture the kind of dynamics that are sort of nodal pricing market will provide. So the short answer is yes, but maybe the exact level of granularity we go there is we're just trying to work out what's appropriate.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Chris. And perhaps then just one final question on smart meter rollout. Just a quick answer, David. You know, how important is that to the enablement of a flexible energy system for consumers? Can we get there without smart meters, or are they critical, do you think?
You can, but smart meters is the most efficient way of doing it. I mean, certainly we were very keen at the beginning of the smart meter program in its inception stages to make sure it had the functionality not only to enable energy retail markets to operate more efficiently, but also it provides valuable information for distribution system operators as well, because they can then monitor the sort of load growth at an individual feeder level or substation level right down onto the LV network, where currently the monitoring level is quite sparse. So although it does it in an agnostic way, you know, you don't pick out individual customers, but you can aggregate through the MPANs to individual feeders and substations, and it's a great way of tracking, you know, what effect EV charging or conversion to heating, electric heating, is having on your local LV system. So you can begin to see, you know, constraints emerging and have time to do something about it before it becomes a major issue. But certainly, as I said earlier on, in terms of enabling, you know, day ahead dynamic tariffs like the Agile Octopus tariff and things like that, it's really key to being able to engage customers in a seamless way to be able to, you know, benefit from that sort of flexibility.
Yeah. Okay. Totally agree, Dave. Thank you, David. Well, I think I'll stop the webinar there, because 2 or 3 minutes before the hour, so give everyone a short break before the next appointment. I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. We welcome your feedback. As I mentioned earlier on, we're in Essen next week at eWorld, so if anyone is attending in Essen next week, come and visit our stand in Hall 1, I think, next week. Be pleased to see you. We're very welcome to reach out to us directly. We welcome your feedback on the presentation today. Any questions that you have, feel free to contact us directly. But hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, David, Chris, John, for your sharing your expertise. And we wish everyone a good rest of the day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.